research project all over the world to make cement, Portland cement, more friendly to the environment, and big strides are being made in that field. So I think that in the very near future, concrete will start rivaling steel in terms of its environmental friendliness. Maybe never in terms of its recyclable character, because steel, of course, is not 100%, but almost 100% of structural steel is recycled. No, I think concrete's a wonderful material. We use it, I'd say, well, concrete is used in almost all of our buildings, but the dominant material is probably well over 3/4 of our buildings. The dominant material is reinforced concrete.
Sì, buongiorno Robertson, sono un collega ingegnere, però le faccio una domanda attuale qui a Bergamo. Sente? Ok. Allora, Bergamo è una città piccola a 40 km quadrati di superficie, quindi l'amministrazione comunale ha puntato su anche edifici di altezza notevole. Però le faccio presente che in un quartiere, per i bergamaschi, Valtesse e Sace, si è progettato delle torri, si sono progettate delle torri di 50 metri, anche meno, e c'è stata una sollevazione dai residenti, perché dicono che sono troppo alte, quindi al posto che sempre più in alto, qui si va sempre più in basso. La domanda è questa: può spiegare sinteticamente i vantaggi della costruzione in elevazione, quindi in altezza notevole, visto che si parla di 500 metri, qui per 50 metri c'è la protesta degli abitanti. Un po' di cultura generale fa bene. Grazie.
Well, I mean, clearly, a 500-meter high building in Bergamo would be preposterous. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a place in Bergamo and in multi-story buildings. I would say that the advantages of the multi-story building reduce cost, the opportunity to create more land, more parks, reduced traffic congestion, reduced fuel consumption, and so forth. These are all items that cannot be disputed. Now, if I had a small house and someone wanted to build next to me a 10-story building, I would probably be unhappy, particularly if I were on the shady side of it. So, I mean, I think cities, towns, they all have to be planned. They all have to have a kind of structure to them. To do it randomly is not sensible, but a properly planned Bergamo could have multi-story buildings. How high, I don't know. I mean, that would take time to sort out, but certainly taller buildings than are here now. And by concentrating more people into a single building and freeing up the land around it for parks, playgrounds, and so forth, it's got to be a huge advantage to people. But it is a cultural thing. It's not. I cannot dispute that, and people will object. But I think if it's properly planned, it will be okay. That's my experience anyway. I think that properly planned cities are the way to go, and Bergamo is at kind of to my eyes, at a kind of a threshold where right now the traffic is terrible, and you have to start thinking about how you're going to organize your city. That would include transportation systems and so forth, in order to make it a more livable place, and you can do that.
Grazie. C'è un'altra domanda?
Sì.
Prego.
Io da profano, a proposito della sicurezza di questo tipo di edifici, a proposito di sicurezza, volevo sapere quali sono oggi, qual è lo stato dell'arte da questo punto di vista, sicurezza per chi ci sta, non solo per chi ci lavora, ma che per chi poi ci vive. E domanda forse banale, ma le Twin Towers, cos'è che non ha funzionato dal punto di vista strutturale?
Okay, well, there are several questions wrapped up there, and if I can remember all of them, but the most important one, I think, is safety in buildings. What is the source of risk? There's some sources which are not really related to how tall the building is, but the most important issue that is related to the height of the building is fire safety. It doesn't matter whether it's a 1-story building or a 5-story building or a 10-story building or 20 or 50 or 100. The largest single issue is fire safety. And I've been around in Bergamo, and I have a habit of looking at things. I'm very good at seeing things. And I don't see lots of sprinklers, for example. But if I were going to go to Tokyo or Shanghai or Hong Kong or Singapore or New York, I would see sprinkler heads everywhere, because fire safety is so important in looking at the loss of life and property in buildings in general, regardless of the height. Now, there are other aspects of safety that are important. Safety because, let's say, earthquakes. And the truth of the matter is that the larger the building, taller the building, the safer it is. It's not unlike that of airplanes. That is, if you get into a single-engine aircraft, it's much less safe than if you get into a big 747, 4 engines and all of that. Because of increased engineering, architectural, building services and so forth, technology much more present in the larger building. So it has safety that goes with that aspect of it. I don't know of any facet of a high-rise building that is less safe than a low-rise building. Now, you ask about the World Trade Center. Now, the World Trade Center was the structural system of the World Trade Center. That's what I do for a living. Was designed for the impact of the Boeing 707 aircraft, which was the largest airplane of its time. Lost in the fog, slow flying, looking to land at what is now called JFK. Then it was called Idlewild. Now, the aircraft that struck it was flying very much faster than it. It wasn't all that much bigger, but it was flying very much faster than that. So, if you will, the energy input into the building from the striking aircraft was enormous compared to that of the design. And yet, I think the consensus of engineers, at least in the United States, is that if it were not for the fires, the buildings would be standing today. That is, the impact of the aircraft was not in itself enough of a factor to bring down the building. It took a second event. The second event could have been a major windstorm, a major earthquake, a great fire, but a second event would be required. Now, if that same aircraft had missed the runway and landed in one of your 1, 2, 5, 10-story buildings, let me assure you, it would have wiped it out completely. No question about it. I could show you by digging my computer. If you saw what one of those aircraft looked like parked in the World Trade Center, it would be mind-boggling. It takes almost up the whole floor. So, what is the incidence? What is the incidence of failure of life because of aircraft running into buildings? It's pretty small. I mean, I don't know about Italy, but in the United States, we lose about 45,000 people every year because of accidents on the highway. And more than that, actually, because of mistakes in hospitals and on. I mean, there are lots of ways to lose your life, being in a building struck by an airplane is an extremely rare event. And following that event, I have to tell you, I thought perhaps my career was over as an engineer, but I was called to the Far East, and I met with some very, very bright people who were building buildings all over the world, and we talked about the risk and what they should be doing in their own buildings. And I have to tell you, they're not doing anything. They're not revising the design. And they are convinced that the kind of buildings that we design are perfectly satisfactory for that event. I'll say something else to you today, and that is that I dealt with the terrorists for the first bombing of the World Trade Center, which took out 120 meters of concrete floor and outside the towers, but did almost no damage to the towers themselves. And I testified for 2 days, and I came away with the feeling that there were some pretty smart people there. There was not stupid people. And today, I don't think any smart person would try to take over an airplane and run it into a building, because they know what would happen. The people on the airplane are going to stand up and fight. They're not going to sit there. That's what happened to the fourth airplane in September 11th. The people learned that what was going to happen. They stood up and fight. Yes, they all died, but the plane didn't strike anything except open field. So I think even that threat has decreased enormously, and I think the event of the bombing was quite conclusive that you can pack a big truck full of explosive and bring it in and set it off 2 meters away from the wall of the World Trade Center, and it dented the columns and things like that, but it didn't do any structural damage of consequence. Matter of fact, the structural damage, the event took place in February. The structure was not fixed, if you call it fixed, until October. It was that little damage. It was an insignificant amount. So the big buildings are very robust, very strong, and if properly designed, they're very redundant. They can take events that are completely outside of your comprehension, that you just cannot imagine, but maybe they will take place. So anyway, I don't think the community of engineers need to apologize for the structural design of the World Trade Center or any other tall building for that matter. We have a lot of people die for various reasons. That's a very rare occasion.
Grazie. Ci sono altre domande? Ce n'è una qui.
Buonasera. Un grattacielo rappresenta un forte carico concentrato su un'area contenuta. Quanto incidono i costi per le fondazioni in relazione alla portanza del terreno?
Mm-hmm. Well, tall buildings impart a load onto the ground which is very much more substantial, obviously, than low buildings. But I point out to you that until very recently, one of the tallest buildings in the world was the Sears Tower in Chicago. It's built on absolutely terrible material. The Shanghai World Financial Center is in a river delta. That is, it's loose sands and silts forever into the ground. So different kinds of foundation systems are used, and there is a cost which is more in time than in money that goes with that work. Now, in the case of the Shanghai World Financial Center, actually, Sautin came up with a great idea, which was to build a kind of a temporary wall just around where the tower would be, so that you could start the tower construction very soon. And then the big wall, which goes around the whole site, which takes much longer to build, was constructed later. Now, both of those walls are reinforced concrete done by the slurry wall system, which actually was first used in Italy, I think in Milan, actually in a subway construction. Was it? Not sure. But anyway, certainly came from Italy and is now a dominant technique for reaching deep into the ground below the water table. But everywhere in the world, we tend to build on the coast, at the sea. Maybe it's tradition, I don't know, but many of our biggest cities are there, and they're there because of commerce and trade and because of shipping and so forth, and almost always the ground is terrible. Now, that's not true in Manhattan. In Manhattan, New York, the ground is wonderful. underneath the buildings. Matter of fact,